Every woman in this room deserves to know the truth, especially the wife. Isabella Ross's voice cut through the music, through the champagne laughter. Through 10 years of a marriage Emily Thorne had believed in completely. She hadn't asked for the microphone. She had simply taken it, walked straight to the stage, snatched it mid-song, and turned to face the crowd like she had been rehearsing this moment for years. Because she had. She raised her left hand. The diamond ring caught the light like a gunshot. Marcus Thorne proposed to me 3 months ago, and I am pregnant with his child. The glass slipped from Emily's hand and shattered on the marble floor. Nobody moved to clean it up. If you are watching this right now, and you have ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely, this story is for you. Please subscribe to this channel, follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the beginning of that night, because what happened in that ballroom didn't start with Isabella walking through those doors. It started much, much earlier. And by the time it was over, nothing in that room, not the people, not the building itself, would ever be the same again. The Serafina Grand Hall had been booked for 6 months. Emily Thorne had planned every detail herself: the ivory floral arrangements that lined the entrance corridor, the custom champagne flutes engraved with the date, the 4-tier cake that the pastry chef had spent 3 days constructing. She had chosen the playlist approved. The seating chart confirmed the guest list twice, and stood at the mirror that evening, telling herself that 10 years of marriage was worth celebrating. 10 years. She had met Marcus when she was 26, and he was 31. She remembered the way he had looked at her across a conference room during a charity event her father had organized. He had been so certain of himself even then, the kind of man who walked into a room and immediately understood its geometry, who spoke and made people lean forward. She had thought back then that his confidence was something he would share with her, that marriage to a man like Marcus Thorne would mean being seen, being chosen. She had worn a simple navy gown to the party. No drama, no statement. Just classic and clean, the way she had always carried herself, quietly with precision, the way her father had taught her. Arthur Vance did not raise women who made noise for no reason. He had raised Emily to be still and lethal, to let her actions do the talking, long after the room had gone quiet. She stood near the champagne station when Marcus found her, straightening his tie, his eyes doing that thing they always did at parties, scanning the room for the most important person in it. He kissed her cheek. He said she looked beautiful. She smiled and told him to go greet the guests from the Meridian Group, the ones who had flown in from Chicago, because they would be insulted if Marcus didn't acknowledge them personally in the first 20 minutes. He laughed. He said, "You always think of everything." She watched him walk away and thought, "Yes, I do." The guests filled the hall steadily. 140 people, all of them pulled from the upper layer of their city's financial and social world. Partners at law firms, managing directors, 2 state senators, the Kellermans who had been friends with the Thornes since Marcus's early days at Hargrove Capital, the Du Bois sisters who knew everyone and forgot nothing. Emily moved through them with grace, accepting congratulations, deflecting the occasional invasive question about whether she and Marcus had considered having children, always redirecting the conversation back to the other person. Because people like to feel important. And she had learned early that making people feel important was its own kind of power. It was about 40 minutes into the evening when she felt the shift. She couldn't name it immediately. It was more like a change in air pressure, the way a room sounds different when too many people look in the same direction at once. Conversations didn't stop, but they slowed. She noticed Priscilla Kellerman look toward the entrance, then touch her husband's arm. She noticed Sandra Du Bois go very still in the middle of a sentence. Emily turned, and there was Isabella. She had seen photographs. She had found them 11 months ago on Marcus's old tablet photographs he had thought he'd deleted, which was frankly insulting, because anyone who worked in finance should know that deleted files don't disappear. They just move to a place you have to try harder to find. Emily had found them, looked at them, and made a decision. She had not confronted Marcus immediately. She had not cried in front of him. She had gone to her brother Julian and then to her father, and the 3 of them had sat in Arthur Vance's study and had a quiet conversation about what came next. That was 11 months ago. Tonight, apparently, Isabella Ross had decided to make her own move. She was 29 years old, tall, dark-haired, and possessed of the particular brand of beauty that requires both genetics and an aggressive relationship with a personal trainer. The red dress was deliberate. Emily understood that immediately. Red at someone else's anniversary party. Red is a declaration. Red says, I am not here to be background. I am here to be the story. Isabella walked in, and she didn't look uncertain for even a single second. That was the part that hit Emily hardest if she was honest with herself. Not the dress, not the ring, though she would get to the ring in a moment. It was the confidence, the absolute unshaken, almost cheerful confidence of a woman who believed she had already won. Emily didn't move. She stood where she was, champagne glass in hand, and watched. Isabella moved through the crowd. She didn't rush. She stopped to smile at people she apparently recognized touching an arm here, laughing at something someone said, playing the room. Emily had to give her credit. She knew what she was doing. She was establishing herself, making sure people had time to notice her, to form the question before she gave them the answer. Then Isabella looked directly at Emily, and she raised her left hand. The diamond was enormous. Obscene, actually, the kind of stone that announces itself from across a room, that catches light so aggressively it almost seems to demand that you look at it. It sat on a platinum band on Isabella's ring finger, and Isabella held her hand at exactly the right angle, and she looked at Emily with that smile, that terrible, certain smile, and let the silence do its work. The conversations around them dropped another register. Emily heard Priscilla Kellerman say very quietly, "Oh my God." She heard Sandra DuBois exhale. She felt the room looking at her, assessing her, waiting to see what she would do, hungry for her reaction, in the particular way that people get hungry when they are about to witness something devastating happen to someone else. It was not malice, most of it. It was just human, the way everyone slows down to look at the accident. Emily did not give them a reaction. She held Isabella's gaze for 3 full seconds, then turned and set her champagne glass down on the nearest surface and walked, not rushed, not stiff, but with exactly the controlled pace she had been trained to maintain, toward the back of the room. She needed 30 seconds, just 30 seconds of not being watched, to process what was happening, to arrange it into something she could work with. She made it to the alcove near the corridor that led to the private dining rooms. She pressed her back against the wall. She closed her eyes. Marcus had given Isabella a ring, not just an affair then, not just the photograph she had found on that tablet 11 months ago. He had given the woman an engagement ring while still married to Emily. While Emily had been planning the champagne flutes and approving the seating chart and standing at the mirror telling herself that 10 years was worth celebrating, Marcus had apparently been making promises to someone else. She stood there for exactly 22 seconds, she counted, and then she straightened her spine, smoothed the front of her gown, and walked back out. She was not going to disappear from her own anniversary party. Marcus had found his way to Isabella by the time Emily re-entered the main room. She could see them from across the floor, Marcus with his hand on Isabella's arm, his face doing something complicated, caught somewhere between panic and that particular male guilt that looks a lot like annoyance. Isabella was speaking to him in a low voice, and Marcus was nodding or shaking his head. Emily couldn't quite tell which, and she watched the two of them and thought he didn't know she was coming tonight. That was interesting. That changed the geometry slightly. She moved toward them. Not fast. She kept the same pace she always kept, spoke to 2 people on the way over. Even laughed at something Gerald Hartwell said about the construction on the Riverside development, genuinely laughed, because Gerald was actually funny, and because she refused to let this woman see her perform urgency. Emily reached Marcus and Isabella, and she stopped, and she said pleasantly and clearly, "I don't believe we've met formally." Isabella looked at her, that smile again. Up close, it was harder to read. There was something beneath the confidence, something that might have been nervousness and might have been excitement, the way some people confuse the two. "Emily," Isabella said, "I've heard so much about you." "Have you?" Emily said. It wasn't a question. Marcus said Emily, and she looked at him, and he stopped talking. "Isabella Ross," Isabella said, extending the hand with the ring. The hand. Making sure Emily would have to look at it or deliberately avoid looking at it, making sure there was no neutral option. "I think we've been sharing your husband." The room had gone genuinely quiet now. Not the polite murmur of a social gathering giving space to a private conversation. Actually quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when everyone is listening and no one wants to be caught listening. Emily looked at the ring. She looked at Marcus. She looked at Isabella. And she said, "Your dress is beautiful." Isabella blinked. For just a fraction of a second, she lost the thread. Emily continued, "The color is very striking. It must have been a specific choice." She let that sit for just a beat, just long enough for it to land, and then she said to Marcus, "The partners from Meridian were looking for you 20 minutes ago. You should go find them." Marcus stared at her. He had the expression of a man who had expected an explosion and received instead a locked room with no visible entrance. He opened his mouth. "Go," Emily said, quietly, with absolute finality. He went. Isabella's smile returned. "That's very composed of you," she said. "I expected something else." "I know you did," Emily said. "Can I get you a drink?" "I'm not drinking," Isabella said. "Actually, that's part of why I'm here tonight. I thought you should hear it from me directly." She tilted her head. "I'm pregnant." The word hit the room the way a stone hits water. Emily heard someone gasp. Priscilla again, she thought. She heard the murmur begin, felt it move through the crowd, the way weather moves through trees, that ripple of whispers, the collective sharp intake of an audience receiving exactly what it came for. Emily did not gasp. She kept her eyes on Isabella's face. She thought about the study 11 months ago. She thought about her father's voice, steady and certain. "We will be ready when it happens. We are always ready." "How far along?" Emily asked. Isabella seemed momentarily thrown by the clinical directness of the question. 14 weeks, she said. "Have you been to the obstetrician?" "Ah, yes." "Good," Emily said. "You should stay on top of the prenatal care. Those early appointments are important." Isabella stared at her. Something in her expression had changed. She had prepared for this moment, clearly had rehearsed. It had imagined Emily's tears or Emily's rage or Emily's visible collapse in front of all these witnesses. She had not prepared for Emily to ask about prenatal care. "You don't seem upset," Isabella said. The confidence had developed a hairline fracture. "I'm at my anniversary party," Emily said. "There are guests I need to attend to." She turned away. "He's going to leave you," Isabella said louder now, loud enough that there was no pretense about not being overheard. "We're engaged. He's going to file for divorce and we're getting married. I thought you deserved to hear that tonight to your face instead of from a lawyer." Emily stopped. She did not turn around immediately. She took one breath. She thought about what her father had said the last time they had spoken about Marcus. "Marcus Thorne has borrowed against everything he has, and most of what he has belongs to us." She turned back around. "Isabella," she said, "I appreciate you coming." And she walked away. The room was buzzing now, a real hum, genuine and chaotic, the sound of 140 people processing something simultaneously. Emily moved through it, accepting the touch of Sandra Dubois's hand on her arm, the look from Gerald Hartwell that was pure sympathetic horror, the way people stepped aside for her, cleared a path because she was moving with such purpose that her path was not available for obstruction. She found a quiet corner near the bar and took out her phone. She sent one text message. It went to Julian. It said 3 words. She made her move. Julian's reply came back in under 60 seconds. It said, "We're already here." Emily looked up from her phone. She looked across the room at Marcus, who had not actually gone to find the Meridian partners, but had instead stopped in the middle of the floor and was watching her with an expression she could only describe as dread. The dread of a man who has made a series of very large bets and is only now beginning to calculate what he actually stands to lose. She looked at Isabella, who had found herself surrounded by a small cluster of the Dubois sisters' friends, all of them talking to her with the particular energy of women who are gathering information they plan to disperse immediately and thoroughly. She looked at the room. Her party, her anniversary. 10 years. She set her phone in her small clutch, and she thought about everything she had not yet done. The meeting that was scheduled for Tuesday, the property documents her father had signed 3 weeks ago, the calls that had been made and the appointments that had been kept, and the quiet, methodical preparation that had been underway for 11 months. She thought about Arthur Vance standing in his study, saying with that voice that had never once wavered in her entire life, "Emily, nothing happens to this family that we do not permit to happen." She almost smiled. She turned back toward the center of the room. She had a party to finish. The next 20 minutes were an exercise in something Emily would later describe to Julian as controlled combustion. Isabella had moved into full performance mode. She was no longer circulating quietly. She was holding court, answering questions with the specific energy of someone who has been waiting a very long time to be the most important person in a particular room. Emily could hear fragments. "Marcus and I have been together for 2 years. We've actually looked at houses in the Riverside district. The baby is due in October. We're hoping for a girl. Marcus, to his credit, or perhaps due to some animal instinct of self-preservation, had gone pale. He had found the Meridian partners eventually because he was a man who could not function without the performance of professional competence, even while his personal life was actively detonating around him, and he was standing with them and responding to what they were saying, but his eyes kept moving back to Emily. Every few minutes, that checking, anxious gaze. She didn't give him anything. The Kellermans approached her. Richard Kellerman, who had known Marcus for 15 years, put a hand on Emily's shoulder and said, "Emily, I want you to know Priscilla and we had no idea. None of us did." "Of course you didn't," Emily said warmly. "Richard, how is the Kellerman Foundation fundraiser shaping up? I heard you're planning a new format this year." He looked at her with something that was almost bewilderment. You're all right. I'm having a lovely evening," Emily said. "Tell me about the fundraiser." He told her about the fundraiser. She listened genuinely. She asked 2 good questions. She excused herself when his wife joined them and made her way to the other side of the room, and as she walked, she actually heard, because the room's ambient noise had developed a strange clarity, a woman she didn't know saying to another woman, "Did you know her father is Arthur Vance?" The Arthur Vance. Emily heard the response, as in the Vance group. Arthur Vance. And the first woman, I thought his daughter was someone entirely different. I had no idea she'd married Marcus Thorne. Emily kept walking. She checked her watch. It was 8:47 p.m. She looked toward the entrance of the hall, and that was when she saw them. Arthur Vance walked through the doors of the Serafina Grand Hall at 8:49 p.m., and the room changed the way a room changes when the air pressure genuinely shifts, not metaphorically, not dramatically, but actually physically, the way the whole quality of a space can alter when something entirely different has entered it. He was 67 years old. He was wearing a dark suit that had been made for him by the same tailor who had made his suits for the past 30 years. He walked without particular speed or urgency, the way a man walks who has never once needed to hurry, because the things he was walking toward had always, without exception, been there waiting for him. Behind him, half a step to the right, came Julian. Julian Vance was 34 and looked as he always did, like a slightly younger version of their father, rendered in sharper resolution, same posture, same measured pace, same quality of attention that managed to take in an entire room in a single glance without appearing to look at anything specific. Julian caught Emily's eyes from across the hall and gave her the smallest possible nod. She breathed. Arthur spotted Emily. He crossed to her, directly bypassing every other person in his path with a politeness so complete it barely registered as bypassing. And when he reached her, he put both hands on her face the way he had done since she was a child and looked at her for a moment. "You look wonderful," he said. "Dad," she said, "thank you for coming." "Of course," he said, as if there had been any other possibility, as if there had been any version of this evening where Arthur Vance would not have walked through those doors. He straightened and looked out across the room with the calm, assessing quality of a man who has just been handed a situation that he is already in the process of solving. "Where is he?" Arthur said. Emily gestured. Marcus had gone quite still on the other side of the room. He had seen Arthur come in. He had gone the color of chalk. "And the young woman," Arthur said. "She's near the bar," Julian said without being asked. He had already found her. Of course he had. Arthur nodded once, then he said quietly for only Emily and Julian to hear, "It's time." Nobody moved to clean it up. The broken glass sat in a constellation of pieces around Emily's feet, and the sound it had made when it hit that marble floor, that sharp definitive crack, seemed to still be echoing somewhere in the high ceilings of the Serafina Grand Hall. 140 people stood in a silence so complete you could hear the ice shifting in the champagne buckets. Arthur Vance looked at the broken glass, then he looked up. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. That was the thing about Arthur Vance that people who had never dealt with him directly failed to understand until they were standing directly in front of him. His volume never changed, and that steady, even tone was somehow more alarming than shouting would have been, because it communicated very clearly that he had no need to shout. Men who shout are asking for control. Men who speak at exactly the same register in every situation already have it. "Young woman," Arthur said, addressing Isabella across the room with the specific courtesy of someone who has decided to be civil as a choice rather than a necessity. "I wonder if you understand where you are standing." Isabella still had the microphone. Her hand was still raised, that diamond still catching the light. But something in her expression had changed the moment Arthur Vance walked toward her. A small shift, barely perceptible, the way absolute certainty develops its first hairline crack when it encounters something it hadn't accounted for. "I'm standing at a party," Isabella said. Her voice came through the speakers, which made it worse. "I'm standing at a party for a marriage that doesn't exist anymore." Someone in the crowd made a sound, not words, just sound. The collective noise of people watching something they cannot look away from. Arthur stopped about 6 feet from her. Julian flanked him on the left. Neither of them reached for the microphone. Neither of them needed to. "Put that down," Arthur said, quietly, almost gently. Isabella looked at him, and for a long moment, 3 seconds, 4, she held his gaze with everything she had, and Arthur Vance simply waited, with the patience of a man who has learned that waiting is the most powerful thing a person can do in a room full of people who are desperately trying to prove something. Isabella lowered the microphone. She didn't put it down entirely, but she lowered it, and that was when Marcus Thorne finally moved. He had been standing frozen near the Meridian Partners for the past 4 minutes. Emily had been counting with the expression of a man watching a car crash that he had caused and could not stop and could not look away from. Now he pushed through the edge of the crowd toward Arthur, and his voice when he spoke had that particular quality of forced reasonableness that men use when they are terrified and need to appear as though they are not. "Arthur," he said. "Arthur, I want to explain to you, Marcus." Arthur didn't turn to look at him. He was still looking at Isabella. "I will speak with you in a moment. Please wait." Marcus stopped. He actually stopped mid-stride because when Arthur Vance told you to wait, some part of your nervous system responded before your brain had a chance to argue with it. Julian turned and looked at Marcus, just looked at him. Marcus took a half step back. Emily, standing slightly behind and to the right of her father, felt something move through her chest. Not relief, not triumph, something more complicated than either of those things. The feeling of watching a machine that you have spent 11 months building finally begin to run. Arthur finally looked at Marcus. He looked at him the way you look at a structural problem in a building, not with anger, not with contempt, but with the sober assessment of someone calculating the cost of repair versus the cost of demolition. "This is your anniversary party," Arthur said to Marcus. "Your wife organized it. Your wife invited these people. Your wife has spent this evening conducting herself with more dignity than you have demonstrated in the past 2 years." He paused. "And you invited this woman here tonight." "I didn't invite her," Marcus said. His voice cracked on the last word. "I didn't know she was—" "Then she came on her own," Arthur said, "which tells us something about the situation you've created." "I can explain the situation." "You cannot," Arthur said. "Not tonight, not in this room." He looked at Isabella again. "I want to ask you something directly, and I want you to answer me honestly, because I think you came here tonight to be honest, and I respect that impulse even if I question the method. Did my son-in-law give you that ring?" Isabella lifted her chin. "He did." "And did he ask you to marry him?" "He did." "While still legally married to my daughter?" The room was so quiet. Isabella said yes. Arthur nodded. Once. like a man receiving information he had already verified through other channels and was now simply confirming in person. "Thank you," he said. He turned to Emily, and here was the thing that broke Marcus later, not Arthur's anger, not Julian's cold silence, not even what came next with the hotel acquisition. It was this. It was Arthur Vance turning to his daughter in the middle of that ruined party and looking at her with an expression of complete, uncomplicated love and saying, "Are you all right?" Emily said, "I'm fine, Dad." Marcus watched his father-in-law cup his daughter's face in his hands for a moment, the same gesture Emily had described to Julian once as the thing that made her feel no matter what that the ground was still under her feet. And Marcus Thorne, standing in the middle of the mess he had made, watched his wife receive from her father the certainty that he had never managed to give her in 10 years, and understood perhaps for the first time with real clarity what he had actually thrown away. Then Arthur turned back to the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, still at that same unraised volume, but the acoustics of the hall carried it perfectly, and every person in that room heard every word, as though he were speaking directly to them. "I apologize for the interruption to what was meant to be a celebration. What I am about to tell you is not drama. It is simply business, and I prefer to conduct business plainly." Julian reached into his jacket pocket and removed a folded document. He did not open it. He simply held it, which was somehow more authoritative than if he had read from it. "As of this afternoon," Arthur said, "the Vance Group has completed the acquisition of the Montague Hotel Company." He let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. "The Serafina Grand Hall, along with the 11 additional properties in the Montague portfolio, is now wholly owned by our family." The silence lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then the room erupted. Not in applause, in the sound of 140 people processing simultaneously the overlapping voices, the sharp exclamations, the rapid whispered exchanges. Priscilla Kellerman saying, "Did he just say?" And Richard Kellerman saying, "The Montague Company, that's a $400 million. And Sandra DuBois not saying anything at all but pressing her lips together with the expression of someone watching an exquisite and very expensive piece of precision machinery, doing exactly what it was built to do. Isabella Ross went pale. She had come to this party holding what she believed was every card. She had the ring, she had the pregnancy, she had the public declaration, the microphone moment, the dramatic entrance. She had constructed this evening as a performance, and she had understood herself to be the one with all the power, the young woman who had won the mistress, who was becoming the wife, the outsider, who had taken everything the insider had. She had not known about the Vance Group. That was clear from her face now. The confidence didn't just fracture, it collapsed, and what was underneath it was something that looked very much like genuine fear, because Isabella Ross was not stupid, and she understood immediately what it meant, that the building she was standing in now belonged to Emily's father. It meant this was not Emily's worst night. It meant this was somehow Emily's night entirely. Marcus understood it too. His face had gone through 3 different expressions in the past 30 seconds. Shock calculation, and then something that was almost grief. Because Marcus Thorne was a finance man, and he could do the math. He understood acquisitions. He understood leverage. He understood that you do not acquire a $400 million property portfolio in a single afternoon without having been preparing for that acquisition for a significant period of time. He looked at Emily. She was already looking at him. "You knew," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was barely even a statement. It was the sound of a man arriving very late at a truth that had been waiting for him. "Marcus," Emily said, "I've known for 11 months." The Meridian partners, to their credit, had the social awareness to step back. The entire crowd had reshuffled itself into a loose ring around the central drama. Arthur, Julian, Emily on one side, Marcus and Isabella increasingly isolated in the center of a room that had, without anyone explicitly announcing it, already decided whose side it was on. Isabella said, "This doesn't change anything." Her voice was smaller now. The microphone was on the bandstand where she had set it down. "Marcus and I, what we have is real. A building doesn't change that." Julian spoke for the first time. His voice was like his father's, measured, unhurried, with that quality of absolute certainty that the Vance men seemed to carry in their DNA. "No," Julian said, "but a contract does." He opened the document he'd been holding. Marcus, your employment at Hargrove Capital is contingent on a conduct clause that was written into your contract 4 years ago at the request of the primary investor in Hargrove's third fund. He looked up. The Vance Group is the primary investor in Hargrove's third fund. We have been for 4 years. Marcus stared at him. The conduct clause, Julian continued with the calm of a man reading a grocery list, includes provisions covering reputational harm to the firm public misconduct, and I want to make sure I'm quoting this correctly. Actions that bring demonstrable embarrassment to the fund's institutional partners. Julian refolded the document. I think tonight qualifies. You're going to have me fired, Marcus said. Not a question. We're going to exercise a contractual right, Julian said. There's a difference. Isabella turned to Marcus. The fear in her face had reorganized itself into something else now, something that looked like the beginning of a very private reckoning. You told me you were going to leave her, she said. Her voice was lower now, meant only for him, but the room was too quiet for it to be private. You told me you had your own money. You told me the Vance family had nothing to do with your career. Marcus said nothing. Marcus, Isabella said louder. Did you know? Did you know who she was? Who her family was when all of this started? Still nothing. Answer me, Isabella said, and now her voice had genuine emotion in it. Not the performed emotion of her entrance, not the strategic vulnerability of a woman who has rehearsed her moment, but something real and raw and beginning to understand that she had been in a way that perhaps hadn't fully occurred to her until this exact moment used. Did you know that her father could take your job, your contracts, everything? Marcus Thorne looked at his mistress, the woman he had given a ring to, the woman who was carrying what she claimed was his child, the woman he had apparently told he was going to leave his wife for, and he said very quietly, "Can we talk about this somewhere private?" The sound that went through the room was involuntary. It came from multiple directions at once. Priscilla Kellerman actually put her hand over her mouth. Sandra DuBois looked at the ceiling like she was asking it for patience. Isabella took a step back from Marcus, as though he had pushed her. Then another step. Then she laughed, a short, sharp, completely humorless sound that had more honesty in it than anything else she'd produced that evening. "Somewhere private," she repeated. "Isabella. I came here tonight," she said, and her voice was shaking now, but not with weakness, with the particular vibration of someone who is furious and humiliated and has just been handed a revelation they weren't prepared for. "I came here because you told me you loved me. You told me this marriage was over. You told me she would be devastated, and you needed me here so you didn't have to do it alone." She stopped. "You were using me as a bomb." The room went absolutely still. Marcus's jaw tightened. "That is not—" "You wanted her to see the ring," Isabella said. "You wanted the scene. You wanted everyone here to watch her fall apart so that what? So the divorce looked like her choice. So you got to walk away from this marriage looking like the man who was simply following his heart." She shook her head. "You put me up to this." It was Emily who spoke next. "Isabella," she said. Her voice was even. No cruelty in it, no satisfaction, just the steady calm of a woman who has been prepared for every version of this evening. "I know you believe he loves you. I know you came here tonight because he made you feel like this was the right thing to do." She paused. "But I need you to understand something, and I want you to hear it clearly, not as an insult, but as information." Emily looked at Marcus, then back at Isabella. "Marcus doesn't make decisions based on love. He makes decisions based on leverage. He always has. And the moment he understood that the leverage had shifted, you watched what he did." Isabella looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the floor. That was the answer. Arthur stepped forward. He addressed the room without raising his voice, and the room attended to him with the complete focus of people who understand they are in the presence of someone who requires it. "The Serafina Grand Hall will remain open for the duration of this event tonight," he said. "The catering staff will continue their service. The bar is open. Everyone is welcome to stay." He paused. "Except for 2 people." He looked at Marcus, then at Isabella. "You have 5 minutes to collect your things and leave this property." "You can't do that," Marcus said, but it came out hollow because he was a man who understood property rights better than almost anyone in that room, and he knew with absolute certainty that yes, in fact, Arthur Vance could do exactly that. "This building belongs to my family," Arthur said simply. "These people are our guests. You are not." He looked at his watch. 5 minutes, Marcus." Julian moved to stand near the entrance to the hall, not blocking it, not threatening, just present, making the geometry of the situation plain. Marcus looked around the room. He looked at the Meridian partners who had found something fascinating to examine near the window. He looked at Richard Kellerman, who met his gaze for exactly 1 second and then looked away. He looked at Sandra DuBois, who did not look away, who looked at him with the level, clear-eyed assessment of a woman who is already composing the account she will give everyone she knows by tomorrow morning. He looked at Emily. Emily was looking at him. Her expression wasn't triumphant. It wasn't devastated. It was something quieter and more final than either of those things. It was the look of a woman who has already made her peace with something and is simply waiting for it to be finished. "Emily," he said. "You should go," she said. He stood there for a moment longer, a man in a beautiful suit in a beautiful room that had stopped being his, and then he turned and walked toward the exit. He didn't look at Isabella. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't say anything to her. He simply walked with what remained of his posture toward the door. Isabella watched him go. Something in her face completed its transformation. In that moment, the last of the evening's performance dropping away, leaving something younger and more fragile and more real than anything she had shown since she walked through those doors. She looked at Emily. Emily said, "Take care of yourself, Isabella, and take care of that baby." Isabella opened her mouth, closed it. Then she followed Marcus through the doors of the Serafina Grand Hall, and the sound of the entrance closing behind them was the quietest, most complete ending Emily Thorne had ever heard. Arthur came to stand beside his daughter. Julian moved to her other side. The three of them stood together in the middle of the room that belonged to their family now, and Emily felt her father's hand find hers and squeeze once a brief, firm, private communication that said everything that needed to be said between them. Then she looked out at the room full of people who had gone from stunned to quiet to something that was settling slowly into a different energy. The energy of a room that has witnessed something and is trying to decide what it means. Sandra DuBois broke the silence. She raised her champagne glass. She had somehow never set it down through the entire ordeal, which Emily thought was either composure or survival instinct, and she said in that voice that carried without being loud to Emily Vance, not Emily Thorne, Emily Vance, and one by one the glasses went up. The glasses stayed up for a long moment, and Emily felt the weight of every single one of them, not as pressure, but as something she had not expected to feel in the middle of this particular evening. Witnessed. She felt witnessed, not pitied, not patronized, seen clearly and completely by a room full of people who had just watched her husband walk out the door and had chosen without hesitation to say her name, her real name. Sandra DuBois held her gaze across the room and gave her a nod, the specific nod of a woman who has survived her own version of this and recognizes the beginning of survival in someone else. Emily nodded back. Then she turned to her father and said quietly, "The band should start playing again." Arthur looked at her. "Are you sure?" "This is still a party," Emily said, "and it's still my anniversary." She paused. "I'd like to dance." Arthur offered her his arm, and Emily Vance danced with her father at 9:17 p.m. in the middle of the Serafina Grand Hall in the building that now belonged to her family, while 138 guests gradually resumed their conversations and their champagne and the particular low-voltage electricity of people who have witnessed something historic and are still processing it. Julian stood at the edge of the dance floor and watched his sister. He had his phone in his hand, and he was reading something on the screen, and every few seconds his expression shifted in a way that someone who didn't know him well would not have been able to interpret. Emily knew him well enough to read it from 15 feet away. He was receiving information, and the information was not good. She found out what it was 20 minutes later. The guests had settled into something approaching a normal party, not the anniversary celebration Emily had planned, but something different, and in its own way more real, the way events that survive catastrophe often develop their own specific warmth. People were talking to her, not with the careful social management of people navigating a difficult topic, but with genuine openness, the guards down, the pretense stripped away by what they had witnessed together. Gerald Hartwell told her about his own divorce, which she had never known about. Priscilla Kellerman took both her hands and said, "You have your mother's spine, Emily. She would have been so proud tonight." Emily had not expected that. She held on to Priscilla's hands for a moment longer than she intended. It was 9:41 p.m. when Julian came to find her. He touched her elbow and tilted his head toward the corridor, the same corridor she had used 2 hours earlier when she needed 30 seconds to herself, when she had pressed her back against that wall and counted to 22. She followed him. "Tell me," she said before he could begin. "Marcus went to a hotel," Julian said. "The Harrington on 5th. He checked in about 20 minutes ago, without Isabella." "Without her," Emily repeated. "She went home, her apartment in Midtown. She called someone on the way. Our contact caught the call." Julian's voice was careful and factual, the way he had always delivered information he knew would land hard. "She called her mother. She was crying. She said, and I want to be accurate here. She said, 'I think he's been lying to me the whole time.'" Emily was quiet for a moment. "How far along did you say she is? 14 weeks? That's what she said tonight. Have you verified it?" Julian looked at her. "Yes. She has an OB in Midtown. The appointment records confirm it." Emily pressed her lips together. "So there is actually a child?" "Yes." She turned that over quietly. It was the one element of this situation that resisted the clean lines of everything else. The one piece that didn't resolve neatly, that had its own weight and its own moral complexity, that had nothing to do with diamonds or hotel acquisitions or conduct clauses. A child was coming. That child had not chosen any of this. That child would exist regardless of what happened to Marcus, to Isabella, to the Harrington on 5th, to all of it. "Okay," Emily said. "Okay," Julian said. "That changes some things," she said. "Not the divorce, not the financial separation, but some things." She looked at her brother. "We're not going after Isabella." Julian was quiet. "Whatever Marcus did to her, whatever she did to us, there's a child," Emily said. "I'm not going to be the reason that child grows up in a war." She said it the way she said most things, not as a request, not as a suggestion, but as a statement of a decision that had already been made. "Do you understand?" "I understand," Julian said. He looked at her with something that was not quite admiration and not quite relief, but lived in the neighborhood of both. "Dad might want to discuss that." "I'll talk to Dad," Emily said. "That's my call to make, not his." Julian nodded. Then he said, "There's something else." And there it was, the tone she had learned to recognize over 31 years of having Julian as a brother, the specific register of his voice, when the something else was the thing that actually mattered. "Marcus made a call," Julian said. "About an hour before Isabella walked through those doors tonight. He called David Reyes." Emily went still. "David Reyes as in his attorney?" "Yes." Julian's voice was even. "The call lasted 11 minutes. We don't have the content, but we have the timing, the duration, and what we know about Reyes's specialties." He paused. "Reyes doesn't do family law, Emily. He does asset protection." The coroner held that information for a moment. "He was already moving money," Emily said. It wasn't a question. "That's what it looks like." She thought about this. 10 years of marriage. She had managed her own portfolio, kept her Vance assets separate, as Arthur had always instructed. That had never been a question, never even a discussion, because Arthur Vance had built structures around his daughter's finances the way you build a foundation before you build a house, before you even know what the house will look like. Marcus had known this. Marcus had always known this, but Marcus also had access to things they had built together. Joint accounts, the apartment, the lake house in Connecticut that she had spent 4 summers renovating, and that Marcus had perhaps convinced himself he deserved half of, or more than half, because Marcus had always believed his contribution to any situation was worth more than anyone else's assessment of it. "How much?" she said. "We're still calculating, but the movement started 3 weeks ago." Julian's jaw tightened slightly, the only visible sign that this information was making him angry. He's been preparing this for a while. 3 weeks ago. Emily ran the timeline backward in her head. 3 weeks ago, she had been finalizing the guest list for this party. 3 weeks ago, she had approved the champagne flute engraving. 3 weeks ago, she had been standing in this building at the tasting event, choosing between 2 different past appetizers, smiling at the event coordinator, thinking about whether the ivory florals were too pale against the hall's walls. 3 weeks ago, Marcus had been moving money and hiring an asset protection attorney. She felt something move through her that was not quite anger. It was sharper and colder than anger, more like the sensation of biting down on something unexpected. Then it passed. "How much does Reyes know about the Vance Group structures?" she said. "Not enough," Julian said. "Marcus never knew enough to tell him enough. He always thought of your assets as his assets, plus the Vance family being wealthy in a general sense. He never understood the actual architecture." "Good," Emily said. "Get Thomas on the phone, tonight." Thomas Breyer was the Vance Group's lead counsel and had been for 22 years. He was 61 years old and had the disposition of a man who genuinely enjoyed complexity. "He's already on standby," Julian said. "Of course he was." Emily almost smiled. "Is there anything in the last 3 weeks that we need to freeze before morning?" "Thomas has a list. He says 90 minutes of work, and it's done." "Tell him to start." Julian typed something on his phone. Then he looked up. "There's one more thing." He hesitated. Julian almost never hesitated, and that single half-second of hesitation told Emily that this last piece was the one she hadn't been prepared for. "Say it," she said. "The Harrington on 5th, Julian said. "The hotel Marcus checked into tonight." He met her eyes. "We own it. It was part of the Montague portfolio. As of this afternoon, it belongs to the Vance Group." The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then Emily said, "He's sleeping in our hotel." "Yes." She stood in that corridor and looked at her brother, and then she did something she had not done once in the entire length of that devastating, extraordinary evening. She laughed. A real laugh, brief and involuntary and completely genuine, the kind of laugh that arrives when reality becomes so perfectly, absurdly complete that the only possible response to it is laughter. Julian watched her. Then slowly he smiled too. "Does he know?" she said. "I don't think he's checked the property listings yet." "Let him sleep," Emily said. "We'll deal with it in the morning." She straightened her gown and turned back toward the party. It was 9:58 p.m. when Emily re-entered the main hall, and the party had transformed into something genuinely warm. The formality of the early evening had dissolved. People had refilled their glasses multiple times. The band was playing something looser and more alive, and the specific intimacy that develops between people who have collectively witnessed something and survived it together was running through the room like a current. Arthur was in conversation with Richard Kellerman and 2 of the Meridian partners near the far end of the room. Emily watched her father work, not because he was performing, but because watching Arthur Vance in conversation was instructive in the same way watching a master craftsman was instructive. He listened with his whole body. He asked questions that made people feel that their answers were the most important information he had received all week. He never once made you feel that he was calculating, even though he always was. She moved through the room, and people stopped. Her touched her arm, said her name, said things they might not have said at the beginning of the evening when everything had been proper and managed and under control. Gerald Hartwell said, "Whatever you need, Emily. Whatever you need from me, you call," she believed him. Sandra DuBois leaned close and said, "I want you to know I made 4 phone calls while I was standing in that room to people who matter. By Monday morning, everyone in this city who needs to know what kind of man Marcus Thorne is will know it." Emily said, "Thank you, Sandra," and she meant it. It was 10:23 p.m. when her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. The number was Marcus's. She looked at it for 3 rings. Then she stepped away from the group she was standing with and answered. "Marcus," she said. His voice on the phone was different from his voice in the room. In the room, he had been performing shock defensiveness, the various postures of a man trying to manage a situation that had escaped him. On the phone, in whatever room he had checked himself into, he sounded stripped. Just a man. Just a tired, frightened man who had run out of performances. "I need to talk to you," he said. "You can talk to Thomas Breyer," she said. "He'll be your point of contact for everything legal." "Emily, please. Not like that. Not through lawyers tonight." A pause. "I know what I did. I know there is no version of this where I come out looking like anything other than what I am. I know that." Another pause. "But I need you to know that what I said to you tonight when I said you looked beautiful, I meant that. I always meant it. Whatever else I've done." She was quiet. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know that doesn't—" "Marcus," she said, not coldly, not warmly, evenly. "Where are you staying tonight?" A pause. "The Harrington. On 5th. "I know," she said. A longer pause. "How do you—" And then she heard the moment he understood. The silence had a specific texture to it, the texture of a man putting together the Montague acquisition and the hotel name and arriving at the inevitable conclusion. "Oh, God," he said quietly. "Get some sleep," Emily said. "Talk to your attorney in the morning. And Marcus—" She paused. "Isabella's child is going to need stability. Whatever you decide about your own life, don't be the kind of man who disappears on a child. That matters more than any of the rest of this." She ended the call. She stood in the corridor for a moment, holding her phone. She thought about what she had just said, and she tested it for honesty, because Emily Vance had no patience for the kind of magnanimity that is really just performance, the forgiveness that people extend in public because it makes them look gracious rather than because they mean it. She tested what she had said to Marcus and found that she meant it. Not because she was forgiving him, that was a longer process, and tonight was not the night for it, but because she had always believed underneath everything that the way you conduct yourself in your worst moments is the most accurate measure of who you actually are. And she intended to conduct herself well. She walked back into the party. At 11:02 p.m., Arthur found her near the bar. The crowd had thinned slightly. Some of the earlier guests had begun to leave, not from awkwardness, but from the natural ebb of the evening, and those who remained were the ones who had stayed because they genuinely wanted to. The Kellermans, Gerald Hartwell, Sandra DuBois, who showed no signs of leaving, and probably wouldn't until the last drop of champagne had been poured. 3 of the Meridian partners who had apparently decided that whatever they had witnessed tonight was significantly more interesting than their hotel rooms. Arthur stood beside Emily, and they were quiet together for a moment, in the comfortable way of people who have spent a lifetime in the same silences. "I want to talk to you about the Serafina," Emily said. Arthur looked at her. He had the particular quality of attention he always gave her when she said something that surprised him. Not skepticism, just genuine alertness. "The Hall," she said. "When we acquired the Montague portfolio, I know the plan was to evaluate each property individually and make decisions about the portfolio over Q1. I know the Serafina was on the list for possible conversion." She looked at him. "I want to keep it." "Keep it," Arthur said. "Not as an event venue," she said. "As something else." She had been thinking about this. Not just tonight, she had been thinking about it for weeks since the acquisition had begun to take shape, since she had walked through this building with Julian and the property assessment team, and had felt something in the bones of it that resisted the purely financial calculation. There are 12 community arts organizations in the city that don't have adequate performance space. 3 of them have been operating out of church basements for over a decade. 2 of them have programs specifically for children from low-income neighborhoods. She paused. The Serafina is 14,000 square feet. It has a stage, a full sound system, a commercial kitchen, and parking. She looked at her father. "I want to convert it into a cultural center. Subsidized rental rates for qualifying nonprofits. A permanent home for 2 or 3 of the smaller organizations." She paused. "I want to run it." Arthur was quiet. "This is not a charity project," she said, because she knew her father well enough to get ahead of that interpretation. "The anchor tenants cover operating costs. The event rental income on non-program nights covers capital. It's financially sustainable within 3 years." She looked at him. "I've run the numbers." "When did you run the numbers?" Arthur said. 3 weeks ago, she said, "when I knew this was coming." Arthur looked at his daughter. He looked at her for a long time with the thorough, unguarded attention of a man who is seeing something he has been watching develop for many years finally arrive at its full shape. And then he said, "Your mother wanted to build a library." Emily looked at him. "She had a whole plan," Arthur said. "She drew the floor plans herself on graph paper at the kitchen table. She was going to call it the Vance Reading House." His voice was level, but beneath the level there was something that Emily recognized from the rare occasions her father allowed himself to speak about her mother, a grief so long carried it had become structural part of the architecture of him. "She died before she could build it." He paused. "I always thought I would do it for her. I never found the right way." He looked at Emily. "Until now, maybe." She took his hand. He let her. "We'll put her name on the door," Emily said. "Margaret Vance Cultural Center," Arthur said quietly. "Yes," Emily said. They stood together in the hall that belonged to them in the building that had begun the evening as the site of Emily's humiliation and had ended it as the foundation of something new, and the music from the band moved through the air around them, and the people who had stayed were talking and laughing and refilling their glasses, and outside the city went on doing what cities do entirely unaware. At 11:34 p.m., Sandra Du Bois came to say goodnight. She kissed Emily on both cheeks, held her by the shoulders, and said, "I want to have lunch with you next week. Not to talk about tonight. We'll talk about tonight. Obviously, I'm only human, but because I think you and I have been underestimating each other for entirely too long." "Thursday," Emily said. "My office. I'll have them order from Maison." Sandra smiled, a real warm, completely genuine smile. "Perfect," she said. "Thursday." She left. Gerald Hartwell left. The Meridian partners left, and as they did, one of them, a man named Charles Fisk, who had been quietly watching the entire evening with the focused attention of someone running continuous analysis, stopped in front of Emily and said, "Miss Vance, I'd like to schedule a conversation about the Vance Group's hospitality portfolio at your convenience." Not Marcus's contact, not the firm's contact, her contact. Emily handed him her card, her personal card, the one with her direct number, and said, "Call my assistant Monday morning." He took the card the way people take things that turn out to be worth considerably more than they expected. By midnight, only the family remained. Arthur, Julian, Emily, the three of them in the Serafina Grand Hall after the last guests had gone, after the catering staff had begun their quiet, efficient clearing of tables, after the band had packed up and the chandeliers had been dimmed to their lowest setting. The hall looked different this way, larger somehow, and more honest, the way spaces look when they stop performing for people and simply exist. Julian loosened his tie. Arthur sat in one of the chairs near the dance floor, with his jacket over the arm, the first time Emily had seen him look anything other than fully composed all evening. She sat across from him. For a while, none of them said anything. Then Julian said, "He's going to fight the conduct clause." "Let him fight it," Arthur said. "Reyes is good," Julian said. "Thomas is better," Arthur said. End of conversation. Julian nodded. He poured 3 glasses of water from the pitcher a server had left on the nearest table and handed them around, and they drank. Emily set her glass down and looked at her father. "When you walked through those doors tonight," she said, "the whole room changed. You know that." Arthur looked at her. "That is not about me," he said. "That is about what they understood in that moment, which is that you are not alone. You have never been alone." He paused. "Marcus spent 10 years trying to make you forget that." Emily thought about that. She thought about the quiet ways a person can be made to feel smaller, not through cruelty exactly, but through the steady, patient work of being undervalued. The way Marcus would defer her ideas in meetings and present them as his own 2 weeks later. The way he would praise her competence in private and manage her authority in public. The 1,000 small adjustments she had made over 10 years to fit herself into a shape that made him more comfortable. She was done fitting herself into shapes. "Dad," she said, "the cultural center. I want to be the one who runs it. Not as a board member, not as a patron. I want to be there every day building it." Arthur nodded. "I know." "You're not going to argue with me about it." "Why would I argue?" Arthur said. I've been waiting 20 years for you to tell me what you wanted to build." He looked at his daughter across the dim, quiet hall that bore her family's future in its bones. "Now you've told me." Emily stood up. She walked to the center of the dance floor and stood there for a moment, alone in the room that had nearly destroyed her 6 hours ago. She looked at the high ceiling and the lowered chandeliers and the empty tables and the place where the band had been. She thought about the floor plan she would commission, the organization she would call on Monday, the name she would put above the door. Margaret Vance Cultural Center. She breathed, and for the first time in 11 months, maybe longer, the future felt like something that belonged to her entirely. The morning after the Serafina Grand Hall was a Tuesday, and Emily Vance was at her desk by 7:15. Not Marcus's desk, not the shared home office in the apartment on Clarendon Street, where she had spent 10 years building a career alongside a marriage and had somehow allowed the two to become tangled in a way she was only now fully seeing. Her desk, the one in the Vance Group's East Wing office that Arthur had given her when she joined the family business at 28, and that she had never used as much as she should have, because Marcus had always made quiet comments about how much time she spent there. Quiet comments that she had spent years reinterpreting as concern rather than control. She was done reinterpreting. Thomas Breyer was already there when she arrived. He was 61 and wore reading glasses that he never seemed to actually need for reading, but carried everywhere as a prop, turning them in his hands when he was thinking. He had a yellow legal pad in front of him covered in his illegible handwriting and a coffee that was already half empty. He stood when she walked in. "Sit down, Thomas," she said. He sat. "How are you feeling?" "Tell me about the accounts," she said. He told her. The summary was this. Marcus had moved approximately $240,000 across 3 transfers in the 3 weeks prior to the party. 2 of the transfers had gone to an account that Thomas had traced to a holding company registered in Delaware, the kind of entity that took about 40 minutes and $300 to set up, and that sophisticated people used when they wanted to create distance between themselves and money. The 3rd transfer had gone directly to David Reyes's firm as a retainer. Thomas had frozen the joint accounts at 6:47 the previous evening, 9 minutes after Julian had called him. The Delaware Holding Company account had been frozen through a court order obtained at 11 p.m. by a judge who owed Arthur Vance nothing, but who also recognized a well-prepared emergency motion when he saw one. "What did he actually get away with?" Emily said. "Nothing," Thomas said. "The timing worked in our favor. He moved the money, but he hadn't yet moved it onward. It was all sitting in intermediate accounts. The freeze caught it." He paused. "He's going to be angry about that." "Let him be angry," Emily said. It was the second time in 12 hours that phrase had been used in this family, and it apparently bore repeating. Thomas turned a page on his legal pad. "The apartment on Clarendon. Title is jointly held. He's going to claim half." "He can have it," Emily said. Thomas looked up over his reading glasses. "I don't want the apartment," Emily said. "I never loved that apartment. It was Marcus's choice, Marcus's taste, Marcus's idea of what a successful person's home should look like." She paused. "Let him have it. I'll take the Connecticut house." Thomas made a note. "The Connecticut house is titled in your name only," he said. "He can argue it was marital property, but given the separate title and the renovation costs that came from your personal accounts." "It'll hold," Emily said. "I know." She had made sure of that 3 years ago when she had pulled the renovation financing entirely from her personal funds rather than joint accounts, partly out of instinct and partly because Arthur had once said very casually, as though he were commenting on the weather, that it is always wise to know which things belong to you alone. She had filed that away. She had filed a lot of things away. It was 8:22 a.m. when Thomas left. Emily sat alone at her desk for 4 minutes, which was all she permitted herself, and she looked at the wall where she had pinned some months ago a photograph of the Serafina Grand Hall that she had taken during the tasting event. She had pinned it there while thinking about the cultural center running numbers on the back of a napkin during the car ride home. She had not told anyone at the time. She had just pinned it to her wall and looked at it occasionally, the way you look at something you are deciding whether to want. She had decided. She pulled out her phone and made the first call of the morning. Dr. Renata Osei ran the Meridian Arts Collective from a converted warehouse on the south side of the city and had been doing so for 11 years on a budget that made Thomas Breyer physically uncomfortable to look at. She was 52 years old and had trained at Juilliard and had turned down 3 opportunities to move to New York because she believed, with the stubborn and apparently inexhaustible conviction of a person who has never been persuaded that the world is only as large as its most obvious centers, that this city needed her more. Emily had known Renata for 6 years through her family's charitable giving. She had always thought Renata deserved more than charitable giving. Renata picked up on the second ring. "Emily." Not a greeting or recognition warm and immediate. "I saw what happened last night. Sandra Dubois has already called me twice." "Good morning, Renata," Emily said. "I need 30 minutes of your time this week." "You can have an hour," Renata said. "You can have whatever you need." "Thursday morning," Emily said. "I'm having lunch with Sandra after, but the morning is yours." "I'll be there," Renata said. Then, because Renata Osei was a woman who said what she meant directly and without apology, "Are you all right, Emily? Genuinely?" Emily thought about the honest answer. "I'm better than I've been in a long time," she said. "I'll explain why on Thursday." She ended the call and made 2 more, one to the architect firm she had already been quietly consulting with about the Serafina conversion, and one to the director of the city's Arts Funding Board, whom she had worked with briefly 3 years ago, and who had left her with the distinct impression that he was waiting for someone to finally do something significant. Both calls went to voicemail. She left clear, direct messages on both. She checked her watch. It was 8:51 a.m. Her phone buzzed. "Julian," she answered. "Tell me." "Marcus called Reyes this morning at 8 o'clock, Julian said. The call lasted 26 minutes. Reyes's assistant called Thomas's office at 8:40 to request a preliminary meeting. Julian paused. Reyes asked for next Monday. "Next Monday is fine," Emily said. "Tell Thomas to offer Wednesday instead, not as a concession, just to establish that we set the schedule." "Done," Julian said. "There's something else." Again, that pause, that particular Julian hesitation, that meant the something else was the main event. "Isabella Ross called our office this morning." Emily was still. "Our office?" "The Vance Group main line," Julian said. "She asked for you specifically. Not for Dad, not for legal, for you." "What did she say?" "She asked if you would speak with her. She said, and I'm reading from the message our receptionist wrote, she said, quote, 'I'm not calling to cause more trouble. I just need to understand what's actually happening.'" Emily set her pen down. She looked at the photograph of the Serafina on her wall. She thought about what she had said to Isabella the previous evening. "Take care of yourself, take care of that baby." And she thought about the sound of Isabella's laugh when she realized Marcus had used her as a weapon, that short, sharp, completely unguarded sound of a woman receiving a truth she wasn't ready for. "Call her back," Emily said. "Tell her I'll speak with her. Not here, somewhere neutral. Give her the address of the Harrington Cafe." She paused. A beat. "Yes, that one. Let her figure out we own it on her own." Julian was quiet for a second. Then, "You're sure?" "I told you last night," Emily said. "We're not going after Isabella. There's a child. And I think Marcus lied to her more comprehensively than either of us initially understood." She picked up her pen. "Set it up for this afternoon, 2 o'clock. The meeting with Isabella Ross happened at 2:17 p.m. at a corner table in the Harrington Cafe, which was bright and quiet at that hour, with the particular mid-afternoon emptiness of a place that fills up at breakfast and dinner and gives itself a rest in between. Emily arrived first. She ordered tea. She sat with her back to the wall, an old habit her father had instilled in her, and she was reading something on her phone when Isabella came through the door. Isabella looked different in daylight, without the red dress, without the ring. She was wearing a gray coat that she held closed at the collar with one hand, and her face had the particular texture of someone who had not slept in a way that sleep cannot entirely fix. She stopped when she saw Emily. For a moment she looked like she might leave. Emily said, "Sit down, Isabella." She sat. A server came. Isabella ordered water and then changed it to chamomile tea with the self-conscious look of someone who has recently become hyper-aware of everything they consume. Emily said nothing about it. For a moment, they sat in the particular silence of two women who have nothing comfortable to talk about and everything important to discuss. "I didn't know who you were," Isabella said. "I mean, I knew your name, Emily Thorne. I knew you'd been married for 10 years. I knew what you looked like from photographs. But I didn't. Marcus never told me about your family, about your father, about any of it." She wrapped both hands around her teacup. "He talked about you the way you talk about a problem you're managing. Not like a person. Not like someone with—" She stopped. "I'm not saying this to excuse myself. What I did was wrong. I knew you existed. I knew he was married. I made choices." She looked up at Emily directly. "But I want you to know what I didn't know." "Tell me," Emily said. Isabella took a breath. "He told me the marriage was essentially over. He said you had grown apart, that you were more partners than anything else, that you both knew it was ending, and it was just a matter of timing." She paused. "He said you wouldn't be devastated because you didn't love him anymore either." Emily kept her face still. "He told me he was going to file for divorce in January," Isabella continued. "He said the anniversary party. He said it was a social obligation, something he had to do for business reasons, and that after it was done, he was going to talk to you and start the process." She put her cup down. "Then 2 weeks ago, he called me and said things were getting complicated. He wouldn't explain what he meant. He just said he needed more time, and She exhaled. "I had been patient for a year. I was 14 weeks pregnant. I told him that I was done waiting and that he needed to make a decision, or I would make one for both of us. And he suggested you come to the party," Emily said. Isabella closed her eyes briefly. "He said it might be the right moment, that you were going to be surrounded by your social circle, and that you would handle it with grace, and it would be, he said, it would be better than a private confrontation. Cleaner." She opened her eyes. "I believed him." "Of course you did," Emily said. "He's very good at making things sound reasonable." "He used me," Isabella said. Not a question. Not even really directed at Emily, more like a statement she was making to herself, completing a sentence she had started the previous night when Marcus had asked to go somewhere private, and everything she had believed about the last 2 years had cracked open in front of 140 witnesses. He wanted the scene. He wanted you humiliated publicly so that the divorce would look like what? Like you couldn't handle the situation. Like it was your idea. "I think," Emily said carefully, "that Marcus believed if you made a scene at that party, I would be too angry and too embarrassed to contest the financial arrangements he'd been preparing. He thought public humiliation would make me want to be done with everything as quickly as possible." She looked at Isabella steadily. "He misjudged me." "Clearly," Isabella said, and then she laughed the same brief, honest, involuntary laugh from the previous night. She caught herself and pressed her lips together. "I'm sorry. It's not funny." "It's a little funny," Emily said. Isabella looked at her. "Why are you being kind to me?" "I'm not being kind," Emily said. "I'm being honest. There's a difference." She set her tea down. "Isabella, I'm going to tell you something because you are going to need to make some decisions, and you deserve to make them with accurate information." She paused. "Marcus's employment at Hargrove Capital is likely to end within the next 60 days. He has approximately $240,000 in frozen accounts that are currently the subject of a legal dispute. The apartment on Clarendon will be his in the divorce settlement, and it carries a mortgage with a monthly payment of $9,000. His personal liquid assets outside of what is frozen are considerably less than he has led you to believe." She watched Isabella's face go through the information. He is not a wealthy man. He is a man with a wealthy wife, a fact that is now past tense. Isabella was very quiet. "The child you are carrying is not my concern in the legal sense," Emily said, "but it is my concern in the human sense. I want that child to have a stable situation, which means I need you to understand what you are actually working with, rather than what Marcus has told you you're working with." Isabella stared at the table for a long moment. Then she said, "He has a cousin in Atlanta. I met him once. He said the cousin had offered him a position at his firm." She looked up. "He told me it was beneath him." "It might be all he has left," Emily said. Another silence. Isabella reached up and touched the base of her left ring finger, the finger where the diamond had been the previous night. It was bare now, Emily noticed but didn't comment. "I took it off this morning," Isabella said, seeing Emily's eyes. "Okay," Emily said. I don't know what I'm going to do," Isabella said. The performance was completely gone now. She was just a 29-year-old woman who was pregnant and frightened and had built a future on a foundation that had just been shown to be entirely fictional. "I have my job. I have my apartment. I have—" She stopped. "You have more than you think," Emily said. "You have yourself, which is the only foundation that can't be taken from you." She paused. "And you have that child who is coming regardless of what Marcus does or doesn't do. Make your decisions based on those two facts, not on him." Isabella looked at Emily Vance across that table, and her expression was something that Emily did not have a precise word for it, lived somewhere between gratitude and shame and the specific raw openness of a person who has just been handed honesty they didn't expect and cannot fully process in real time. "You could have destroyed me last night," Isabella said quietly. "You had every reason." "I had no reason," Emily said. "You weren't the one who made vows to me." She stood up and collected her coat. "Take care of yourself, Isabella. See your doctor. Build something real." She paused. "And if Marcus tries to minimize what he owes that child called Thomas Breyer's office, he'll know what to do." She left a 20 on the table for the tea and walked out of the Harrington Cafe into the sharp afternoon air. And as she did, she felt something shift in her chest. Not completion exactly, not the satisfying click of a conclusion, but something lighter and more open, like a window being raised in a room that has been closed for too long. It was 3:04 p.m. She was outside the Harrington for approximately 90 seconds before her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. Then she did. "Miss Vance." A man's voice, measured professional with the particular quality of someone who chooses every word before releasing it. "My name is Edward Caulfield. I'm the executive director of the National Arts Infrastructure Fund." Emily stopped walking. The National Arts Infrastructure Fund was a federal endowment that channeled significant capital into cultural development projects in mid-sized American cities. It had been aggressively underfunded for years and had recently received a new congressional allocation that the arts community had been discussing with cautious excitement. Emily knew this because she had been reading about it quietly in preparation. "Mr. Caulfield," she said, "how did you get this number?" "Arthur Vance gave it to me this morning," Caulfield said. "He called me at 7 a.m. and spoke for about 12 minutes. I have been in this work for 23 years, and in those 23 years, Arthur Vance has never once called me directly about anything." A pause. "So when he did, I listened very carefully." Emily closed her eyes for half a second. Her father, of course. "He told me about your plans for the Serafina property," Caulfield continued. "He also told me, with what I interpreted as characteristic understatement, that you had put together a financially sustainable model for a cultural center at that location." Another pause. "I'd like to see the model, Miss Vance. We have a grant cycle opening in 6 weeks, and your project is exactly the profile we're looking for." "Federal grant funding," Emily said. "Potentially significant federal grant funding," Caulfield said. "Enough to accelerate your timeline considerably." Emily started walking again. Faster now. "How soon can we meet?" "I'm in the city through Friday," he said. "I can make myself available at your convenience." "Tomorrow morning," she said. 9 a.m., the Vance Group offices." She paused. "Bring whatever criteria documentation you have for the grant application. I'll have my model ready." She ended the call and immediately dialed Julian. He picked up on the first ring. "I already know," he said. "Dad told me 20 minutes ago. He called Caulfield this morning at dawn." He called him at 7 a.m. Julian, who calls a federal official at 7 a.m. "Dad does," Julian said simply. "Are you angry?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "No, I'm not angry, but I need you to know I'm running this. The cultural center is mine. Dad can open doors. He can make calls at 7 in the morning to whoever he wants, but the decisions are mine." "He knows that," Julian said. "That's why he called Caulfield instead of doing it himself." A pause. "Emily, he's been waiting for you to build something, not as a Vance Group project, as yours." She stopped on the sidewalk. Around her, the city moved with its ordinary afternoon energy, people with coffee cups and briefcases and dogs on leashes and the million small frictions of urban life, and she stood in the middle of it and felt for the second time in 12 hours that particular sensation of the future belonging to her. "I need the numbers finalized by 9 a.m. tomorrow," she said. "Everything. The model, the projection, the operating budget through year 3. "I'll be up all night," Julian said. "So will I," she said. "Order food. Come to the Clarendon office at 6 and we'll work through it together." "You're going back to the Clarendon apartment," Julian said. "For tonight," she said. "I'm not afraid of the apartment, Julian. It's just a place. I'll get my things out by the end of the week." She paused. "And call the Connecticut house. Have them open it up. I want to go out there this weekend." "Done," Julian said. She put her phone in her pocket and stood for a moment longer on the sidewalk. She thought about Marcus at the Harrington, her hotel, and Isabella at the cafe, turning her teacup in both hands, brave enough to ask the questions she needed answers to. She thought about Arthur making a 7 a.m. phone call like it was the most natural thing in the world, because for Arthur, Vance clearing a path for the people he loved was not strategy. It was instinct. She thought about her mother's name on a door. Margaret Vance Cultural Center. She could see it. She started walking. By 4:30 p.m., the news about Marcus Thorne had begun to move through their social circle with the specific velocity that important information achieves in communities where everyone knows everyone and everyone's business is in some sense communal property. Emily knew this because her phone had been buzzing steadily since noon, not with gossip exactly, but with the kind of messages that are the social equivalent of people repositioning themselves after an earthquake, checking where the solid ground is now. The Meridian partners had sent a formal message to the Vance Group offices requesting a meeting to discuss ongoing collaboration. Two of Marcus's former colleagues at Hargrove had called Julian separately to verify what they had heard about the conduct clause. The building management company for the Clarendon apartment, apparently fully aware of who actually controlled the Montague portfolio, and therefore who held the master lease on the building, had called to ask if there were any changes they should be aware of regarding the tenancy. Emily told them there would be changes. She would be in touch by end of week. It was 5:47 p.m. when the last twist of that particular day arrived. Thomas Breyer called. His voice had the specific quality it got when he was delivering information that had changed shape since the last time he had assessed it. "Emily," he said, "David Reyes withdrew from Marcus's case this afternoon." Emily sat up straighter in her chair. "When the formal withdrawal was filed at 4:15, Thomas said. "No public statement. But I have a contact at Reyes's firm who told me off the record that Reyes looked into the full picture of Marcus's financial situation this morning and determined that the retainer Marcus had paid him did not adequately represent the complexity of what he was looking at." Thomas paused. In plain language, Reyes did the math and decided Marcus couldn't afford him. The symmetry of this was almost architectural. Marcus had spent 3 weeks moving money, preparing for a battle he believed he could win, hiring the best attorney he thought his resources could sustain. And the attorney, upon seeing the actual shape of those resources, had returned his retainer and walked away before the first meeting. "He's going to have to find new counsel," Emily said. "Yes," Thomas said, "and at his current liquid position, his options are considerably more limited than they were yesterday morning." Emily was quiet for a moment. She did not feel triumph. She noticed its absence and recognized it as something healthy, the sign of a person who has been fighting for survival rather than victory, who has been building something rather than simply tearing something else down. "Thomas," she said, "in the divorce settlement, I want the financial terms to be fair." A pause. "Fair," Thomas said carefully. "I want what's mine," she said, "every cent of it secured and documented. But I don't want to take things that aren't mine just because I can." She thought about what she had said to Isabella. He is not a wealthy man. He's going to need to rebuild his life. That's not my problem to solve, but I'm not going to make it impossible either. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with this tone of a man who has been doing this work for 30 years and has encountered the full spectrum of how people behave when their marriages end, You know, in my experience, the people who come out of these situations whole, really whole, they're almost always the ones who make exactly that calculation. It's not a calculation, Emily said. It's just who I am. I know, Thomas said. That's what I mean. She said goodnight and set the phone down. She looked at the room around her desk, her files, the photograph of the Serafina pinned to the wall, and she understood that this was only the second day, that there would be 100 more days of paperwork and negotiation and meetings and decisions before any of it was truly finished, that the process of unbuilding a life was long and detailed and often ugly, and that she would need to be patient with it. But she also understood with a clarity that felt new and permanent that the unbuilding was not the story. The unbuilding was just what had to happen before she could build what came next. And what came next was already taking shape in the numbers on Julian's legal pad, in the name she had asked to put above a door in the meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, with a man who had a grant cycle opening in 6 weeks, and a federal fund looking for exactly the kind of project she had been quietly designing for months. She gathered her papers. She stood. She put on her coat. And she went to build something. The meeting with Edward Caulfield lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes, which was 1 hour and 40 minutes longer than scheduled. And when it ended at 11:40 a.m. on Wednesday morning, Emily Vance sat alone in the conference room for approximately 3 minutes and allowed herself to feel something she had been careful not to feel prematurely. Hope. Real, structured, financially documented hope. Caulfield had not come to the meeting as a courtesy. He had come as a man who had spent 23 years looking for exactly this combination of elements private capital community needs: sustainable operating model and someone willing to actually run the thing rather than attach their name to a plaque and attend 2 galas a year. He had sat across from Emily and Julian and reviewed their numbers with the focused attention of someone who knows what good work looks like because he has seen enough bad work to calibrate the difference. He had asked hard questions. Emily had answered every one of them without hesitation, not because she had rehearsed the answers, but because she had lived with the numbers long enough that they were part of her thinking the way grammar is part of speech. At the end of the meeting, Caulfield had said, "I want to be direct with you, Miss Vance. The grant cycle opens in 6 weeks. Applications are reviewed by a panel, and I have no authority to predetermine outcomes. What I can tell you is that your project meets every criterion we have published, and several that we have not published, but that matter to the people making these decisions." He had paused. "Apply on the first day the cycle opens. Have your documentation complete, and make sure the community partnership letters are from organizations that have actual track records, not just good intentions." "I have a meeting with Renata Osei tomorrow morning," Emily had said. Caulfield had smiled for the first time in the meeting. "Renata Osei, you already have Renata." He had nodded once. "Apply on day 1. Now Emily looked at the papers spread across the conference table, and she thought about the distance between where she had been 2 mornings ago, standing in the Serafina Grand Hall in a navy gown, watching her marriage end in front of 140 people, and where she was now. The distance was not geographical. It was not even temporal. It was the distance between a life she had been fitting herself into and a life that was being built to her actual dimensions. That was the only way she could describe it to herself. Finally, built to fit. Julian knocked on the conference room door and opened it without waiting. "Thomas called," he said. "Marcus's new attorney reached out this morning. Someone named Patterson out of Westchester." "Patterson," Emily repeated. "Not a firm she's heard of." "He's decent," Julian said. "Not Reyes, but decent." He came in and sat down. "He's already signaling that Marcus wants to settle quickly. No contest on the major assets." Emily looked at her brother. That was fast. "Reyes withdrawing spooked him," Julian said. "And I think last night something happened." He hesitated in that Julian way that meant the something was significant. "Marcus called Isabella." Emily waited. "She didn't answer," Julian said. "He called 4 times between 10 p.m. and midnight. She didn't pick up once." He paused. And this morning, she sent a letter to his attorney Patterson's office, received it at 8 a.m., formally requesting a paternity acknowledgement agreement and a child support arrangement to be negotiated independently of Marcus and Emily's divorce proceedings. Julian set his phone on the table. She retained her own counsel. Emily absorbed this. Isabella Ross, 24 hours after arriving at a party with a diamond ring and a declaration, had retained her own attorney and sent a formal letter demanding independent legal recognition of her child. The diamond was off her finger. Marcus was calling her 4 times at midnight and getting voicemail. The woman who had arrived at the Serafina Grand Hall as a weapon had decided apparently overnight that she was nobody's weapon. "Good for her," Emily said. And she meant it. Julian looked at his sister with that expression he had, the one that was almost but not quite surprise, that acknowledged without sentimentality that Emily continued to be consistently more than the situation required. "You know she's going to complicate Marcus's financial picture considerably," he said. "Child support on top of everything else." "That's between them," Emily said. "That is entirely between them. We are not involved." She stood up and began gathering the papers from the conference table. "Tell Thomas to respond to Patterson today. Tell him we want this clean and fast. Fair terms, full documentation, no games." She looked at Julian. "I want this done before the grant application opens. I want my name unattached to Marcus Thorne before I walk into anything new." 6 weeks, Julian said. 6 weeks, she confirmed. It was Thursday morning, and Emily arrived at the Vance Group offices 20 minutes before Renata Ose and used those 20 minutes to do something she had been putting off since Monday. She called the Clarendon apartment. Marcus answered on the 3rd ring. He sounded like a man who had been awake for most of the past 72 hours, which she suspected was accurate. "Emily," he said. The relief in his voice at hearing her was something she noted and set aside, because relief was not the same as remorse, and she had learned over 10 years of marriage to Marcus Thorne that the two could wear very similar expressions. "I wanted to let you know directly," she said. "Before you hear it from Patterson, Thomas has instructions to move quickly. We're not looking for a long process. We want fair terms and a clean close." She paused. "The apartment is yours. The Connecticut house is mine. The joint accounts will be divided per the prenuptial provisions. It will be straightforward." A silence. "There is a prenuptial," Marcus said. Not a question he knew perfectly well. There was a prenuptial. He had signed it 10 years ago in Arthur Vance's attorney's office, while Arthur had sat at the far end of the table and said nothing which had somehow been more intimidating than anything he could have said. "There is," Emily said. "You agreed to its terms when you married me. They haven't changed." Another silence. "Emily," his voice shifted. "I know you have no reason to believe this. I know I have. I know what I've done. But I want you to know that somewhere in the middle of all of this, when it was good between us, it was real. It was real for me." Emily was quiet for a moment. She thought about the version of Marcus she had married at 28. The one who had looked at her across a conference room with that certain forward-leaning attention, who had made her feel, at least for a period, that being chosen by him meant something. She thought about the 10 years that had followed, the slow, patient diminishment, the quiet comments about her time at the family offices, the professional credit he had borrowed and repaid in the currency of her silence, the way he had looked at her tonight with that dread, the dread of a man calculating his losses. "I believe it was real," she said. "I also believe that real and honest are 2 different things, and you never fully managed both at once." She paused. "Take care of yourself, Marcus, and when that baby comes, be there. Whatever else you do or don't do, be there." She ended the call. Her hands were steady. She noticed that. She thought it was probably worth noticing. Renata Ose arrived at 9 a.m., exactly which Emily had expected, because Renata was a woman who understood that punctuality is a form of respect, and she settled into the chair across from Emily's desk with the particular quality of someone who has been in enough rooms with enough people to know when something real is about to be said. Emily told her everything. The cultural center plan, the Serafina conversion, the financial model, the meeting with Caulfield, the grant cycle. She laid it out cleanly and completely, the way she had presented the numbers to Caulfield, and Renata listened, the way she always listened, with her whole body, her hands still, her eyes fully present. When Emily finished, Renata was quiet for 4 full seconds. Then she said, "You want the Meridian Arts Collective to be an anchor tenant." "You'd have a permanent home," Emily said. "Subsidized rent locked for 7 years. First right of refusal on the main performance space for your season scheduling. Input on the cultural programming calendar." She paused. "And your name on the advisory board if you want it. Though I suspect you'd rather have the square footage than the title." "I want the square footage," Renata said immediately. Then she laughed a full, genuine, joyful laugh that filled the office in a way that made Emily realize how little laughter had occupied that room before. "Emily, do you understand what this would mean? For 11 years I have been writing grant applications to keep the lights on in a warehouse. 11 years. My musicians practice in a space that has no reliable heating. My youth program shares a hallway with a plumbing supply company." She leaned forward. "If you can do what you're describing, if this is real—" "It's real," Emily said. "The numbers are real, the grant application is real, and the building belongs to my family. It is entirely real." Renata sat back. She pressed her fingertips together and looked at the ceiling for a moment in a way that Emily recognized as a person, performing rapid internal calculations, not financial ones, but the kind of calculations that involve years of work and years of hope, and the question of whether the thing you have been building toward is actually within reach. Then she looked at Emily. "What do you need from me?" Renata said. "A letter of intent," Emily said, "for the grant application, specific detailed with your program numbers, your audience data, your community reach." Caulfield said the community partnership letters need to be from organizations with actual track records. She paused. "And I need you to call 2 other organizations that I've identified as potential anchor tenants and talk to their directors. They don't know me well enough yet to take a call about committing to a new venue. They know you." "Linden Youth Ensemble and the Crossroads Theater Project," Renata said immediately, because of course she knew which organizations Emily meant. Of course she had thought about exactly this question herself, lying awake in her own office, on her own sleepless nights. "I've known both of their directors for years." "Can you make those calls today?" Emily said. "I'll make them in the car on the way to lunch," Renata said. Emily smiled. For a moment the 2 women looked at each other across the desk, and in that look was a full and unspoken conversation about what it means to spend years working in the margins of a city's attention and what it means when those margins suddenly become the center of something. "Margaret Vance Cultural Center," Emily said. "That's the name." Renata repeated it softly. "After your mother." "Yes?" "She must have been a remarkable woman," Renata said. "She drew the floor plans on graph paper," Emily said, "at the kitchen table. She never got to build it." She paused. "We're building it." It was the first time she had used the word "we" in reference to the project, and something about saying it out loud in that room to this woman made it more real than any number or any document had managed to make it. Renata stood up and extended her hand. Emily stood and took it, and then Renata pulled her in for a brief, firm embrace, the kind that has work in it, rather than comfort the kind that says, "We have things to do, let's get started." They had a great deal to do. They got started. The weeks that followed moved with the specific pace of construction, not dramatic, not cinematic, but steady and cumulative, and requiring constant attention. Emily's mornings began at her desk before anyone else arrived and ended when the work was finished, which was often late. The divorce paperwork moved through its stages without crisis. Patterson proved to be straightforward. Thomas proved to be efficient, and Marcus proved to be a man who had run his calculations and understood that the cleanest exit was the best one available to him. The papers were signed on a Thursday afternoon, 5 weeks after the party in Thomas Breyer's conference room, with both attorneys present, and neither Marcus nor Emily in the same room at the same time, because Thomas had arranged it that way, and Emily had been grateful for the consideration. She did not feel relief when it was done. She felt more accurately the absence of weight, the specific lightness of a thing that has been complete for a long time, finally being recognized as complete. The grant application was submitted on the first day of the cycle as Caulfield had instructed. It was 47 pages. Emily had reviewed every page herself. Julian had reviewed it after her. Thomas had reviewed the legal sections. Renata had written the community impact statement and Emily had read it twice, and both times had needed to set it down for a moment because Renata wrote about the Meridian Arts Collective's youth program with the kind of precision and love that makes words feel like architecture. The letter of support from the National Arts Infrastructure Fund arrived 6 days after submission. Not a grant confirmation, the cycle review would take 8 more weeks, but a letter from Caulfield's office formally designating the Margaret Vance Cultural Center project as a priority application, which was a designation that Caulfield had apparently never used before in 23 years, and which Thomas said when he read it was the kind of thing that meant the answer was already yes. It was a Friday afternoon, 4 weeks after the divorce was finalized, when Arthur Vance came to the Serafina Grand Hall to see what his daughter had built. Not what she had finished. There was years of work remaining. The renovation plans were approved, but construction hadn't begun. The anchor tenant agreements were signed, but the spaces weren't ready. The programming calendar existed on paper and in Renata's meticulous notebooks, but had not yet been lived in the way a real calendar gets lived in, with conflict and compromise and the organic chaos of actual human activity. But the bones were visible. The direction was clear. And Arthur Vance walked through the Serafina Grand Hall on a Friday afternoon with his daughter and his son, and looked at the architectural drawings pinned to the temporary boards Julian had set up, and he looked at the partnership documents stacked on the folding table near the stage, and he stood in the center of the empty floor and was quiet for a long moment. Emily stood beside him and waited. "Your mother would have been here every day," Arthur said finally. "I know," Emily said. "I'm going to be here every day." He looked at her. "Good," he said, simple and direct and complete, the way Arthur Vance said all the things that mattered most. He put his hand briefly on her shoulder, a gesture so familiar and so specifically his, so different from anything Marcus had ever offered her that she had to look at the architectural drawings for a moment to maintain her composure. Julian was standing near the stage looking at the plans. He said without turning around, "The youth rehearsal space is on the east wing." "Soundproofed," Emily confirmed. Renata insisted. She said there's nothing worse than a trumpet section bleeding through a wall into a dance rehearsal. Julian smiled. He turned around and looked at the hall. "It's good, Emily. It's genuinely good." It was the highest praise Julian gave anything, and she knew that and took it fully. The twist that Emily had not seen coming arrived on a Monday morning 8 weeks after the application, in the form of a phone call from a number she recognized as Caulfield's office at 7:53 a.m. She was already at her desk. She always was. "Miss Vance," Caulfield said, "the panel completed its review on Friday. I'm calling because the formal notification goes out tomorrow, and I wanted you to have a moment to process this before it becomes official." He paused in the specific way of a man who is aware that what he is about to say is going to change something. "The Margaret Vance Cultural Center has been awarded the full grant allocation." Another pause. "All of it, not a portion, the full amount." Emily set her pen down. The full allocation from the National Arts Infrastructure Fund's current cycle was $1.2 million. "Mr. Caulfield," she said, "the panel's notes cited the sustainability model, the community anchor partnerships, and I'm reading from the notes here, the quote, unusual combination of institutional support and demonstrated personal commitment from the project's director." He paused. "That last part was my note." Emily was quiet for 3 seconds. "Thank you," she said, "for the call and for the note." "Build something extraordinary, Miss Vance," Caulfield said. "I intend to come to the opening." "I'll have your name on the guest list," she said. She ended the call and sat in the early morning quiet of her office. $1.2 million, the renovation fully funded, the programming endowment established. The first 2 years of operation secured without requiring her family's capital reserves, which meant the cultural center could stand as its own entity, not a Vance Group project, not a family charity, but its own thing, with its own financial foundation accountable to its own mission. She called Renata first. Renata screamed an actual brief, completely undignified scream of joy, which Emily listened to with her eyes closed and her hand pressed flat on her desk because she needed to feel the realness of the surface beneath her to balance the lightness of everything else. Then Renata said, I'm calling the Linden director right now, and then I'm calling every single person who ever told me that a permanent space was a fantasy. Call them all, Emily said. She called Julian second. He said, I know. Thomas called me 30 seconds ago. He already heard somehow. Of course he did, Emily said. She called Arthur last. He picked up immediately. She could hear in the background the particular morning sounds of his house, the coffee, the radio low, the housekeeper moving through the kitchen, the sounds of her childhood mornings. She said, Dad, we got it, the full allocation. Arthur Vance was silent for a moment. Then he said in a voice that was as steady as it always was, and underneath that steadiness was something that was not quite anything she had a precise word for. Not pride exactly, something more ancient and more tender than pride, something that lived in the specific place where a parent's love meets the astonishing reality of a child becoming who they were always going to be. He said, I know. You know? She said. Caulfield called me last night, he said. He wanted to tell me before the official notification. A pause. I told him to call you first in the morning. I told him it wasn't my news to receive. Emily looked at the photograph of the Serafina still pinned to her wall. She had taken it at the tasting event months ago, with her phone standing in the middle of the empty floor, between the tables, thinking about possibility. It had been a question then. It was not a question anymore. Dad, she said, your mother used to say, Arthur said, that the best buildings are the ones built by people who have something to prove to themselves, not to the world, to themselves. He paused. She was right about most things. Emily closed her eyes for a moment. We're naming the reading room after her, she said. The main one on the second floor. I was going to tell you in person, but I want you to know now. She had decided this in the Connecticut house that weekend, standing in the kitchen her mother had never seen in the house that now belonged to Emily alone, thinking about what it means to carry someone with you into the future. The Margaret Vance reading room, Arthur said quietly. Yes, Emily said. He didn't say anything for a moment. She could hear him breathing. She let the silence be what it was, which was not empty, which was not awkward, which was full of something that only a father and a daughter who have survived something together can hold in the same silence without needing to name it. Come to dinner this weekend, he said finally. I will, she said. The groundbreaking for the Margaret Vance Cultural Center took place on a Thursday morning in late autumn, and Emily Vance stood in front of a building that had begun the year as the site of her greatest humiliation, and now bore her family's name above its entrance in clean, permanent letters. Renata was beside her. Julian was beside her. Arthur stood at the edge of the gathered crowd with the expression of a man watching something he had always known was coming and had simply been patient enough to wait for. The city had sent a representative. 2 city council members attended, 3 photographers from arts publications. Sandra Du Bois, who had never in her life missed an event she considered historically significant. Edward Caulfield, who had flown in specifically, and who stood near the back with his hands in his pockets and watched with the satisfaction of a man whose job requires him to believe in things before they exist, and who is occasionally on days like this one proven right. Renata spoke first about the Meridian Arts Collective's 11 years in a warehouse, about the trumpet sections and the plumbing company hallway, and the grant applications written at 2 a.m., and the youth students who had practiced their instruments in spaces that didn't deserve them and who would now have a home that did. She spoke with the precision and the love that she brought to everything, and when she finished, there was a silence before the applause that Emily recognized as the sound of people genuinely moved. Then it was Emily's turn. She stepped forward. She looked out at those people gathered at Renata and Julian and her father and Sandra Du Bois, who was already composing the account she would give everyone she knew at Caulfield near the back, with his hands in his pockets, at the faces of the community organization directors who would bring their programs into this building and fill it with the particular noise and energy and argument and beauty of actual human creative life. She looked at the name above the door, Margaret Vance Cultural Center. She thought about her mother drawing floor plans on graph paper at the kitchen table. She thought about Arthur saying she never got to build it. She thought about the night in the Serafina Grand Hall when she had stood in the center of the dance floor alone after everyone had gone and felt the future open up in front of her like a space that had always been there waiting. She did not have a long speech prepared. She had 4 sentences written on a note card in her own handwriting, and she had practiced them exactly once because she believed that the things worth saying should be said simply. She said, "My mother wanted to build something. My father taught me to be ready when the moment came. This city gave me the reason, and I am grateful every single day for all 3. She looked at Arthur. He nodded, once. That small, precise, complete communication that had meant the same thing her entire life. "I see you, I am proud of you. You are not alone." She picked up the ceremonial shovel. She pressed it into the ground. The earth turned over clean and dark in the morning air, and the photographers captured it, and Renata put her hand on Emily's arm, and somewhere behind her, she heard Sandra Dubois say to whoever was standing beside her, in a voice that carried the way Sandra Dubois's voice always carried, "That is a woman who knows exactly who she is." Emily Vance stood in the ground she had broken in front of the building that bore her mother's name in the city that had watched her worst night become the first night of the rest of her life, and she did not think about Marcus Thorne, and she did not think about a red dress or a diamond ring or the sound of breaking glass on a marble floor. She thought about what came next, and what came next was entirely, completely, irrevocably hers.